Welcome to Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica, where no topics are taboo or off limits. Join us as we let loose and discuss the real, raw feelings about parenting.
In each episode, we will bring you heartfelt discussions, real-life stories, and special guests that will both entertain you and encourage community so no one feels alone in their parenting journey.
Thanks so much for listening. Now let's start the show.
Hi, everybody. Today we have a very special appearance on Parent Coaches Unleashed. Carrie's husband, Ken, and my husband, Lonnie, are with us. Say hi, guys.
Hey there. Hey, guys. Hello, everybody.
It's a full-on party today.
Yes. And the reason this episode came about is because, coincidentally, Ken and Lonnie both shared with Carrie and I the same article on parenting. And I said to Carrie, oh, look at this article that Lonnie sent me. And she said, you're not going to believe this, but Ken sent me the same article. The article dealt with parents and the anxiety and the amount of stress that they're under in today's day and age. So if you guys can just give us a little background, what made you think that article would be a good topic of discussion for parents and for our listeners?
So this is Ken. Hi. I think because the two of you are doing this podcast, our antenna is always up. We're always trying to find opportunities for you guys to talk about interesting parenting topics. And we did not talk about this article. It was totally coincidental that we sent it. And I can tell you, Jessica, that I remember one of the first episodes, you said that the goal of being a parent is to teach our children to be good humans. And it struck me as something that would be really hard to do as a parent if you were suffering from high levels of anxiety. How are you going to help your children be better humans when you are struggling to be a good human yourself? And so I wasn't sure how you might use the article in a podcast, but it just struck me as something you guys should at least read.
So you had no ulterior motives. You didn't think you were going to be a guest on the show because of that article.
I had no idea. None whatsoever.
But I would like to share the U.S. Surgeon General's statistic and probably why it alerted both of you to send this to us, because it's alarming. In the past month, 48% of parents reported an overwhelming level of stress. So that's almost half of all the parents that were polled. Like that's crazy. Like we all know that life is stressful, parenting is stressful, but who knew that people are feeling overwhelmed by their day-to-day tasks that also involve parenting?
I think a large part of that is that, like with so many things we talk about with parenting, people might not be discussing their levels of stress because, like so many things, they feel like they're alone. They're like, nobody else could really be experiencing this much stress. I must be doing something wrong. You know, why is this so hard for me? Why is this so stressful? Why am I so anxiety ridden just by parenting and my daily life?
So the reason why I had sent the article was a little different. Of course, it's what Ken said in terms of always having our tenor up in terms of what would make a good topic. But I was thinking about my parents compared how they parented compared to how we parent. And I feel as though with the advent of social media and all of that, and everybody knows what everybody's doing, there's a lot of comparisons of how am I keeping up with the Joneses. You see this a lot with college acceptances in terms of where somebody got in. You see it in terms of sports. You see it in all these things. And my parents were not, my parents were great parents. I loved them and all that, but they were not involved in any way in my sporting career, in my college search or anything like that. So they had no stress as it relates to that. That was all on me. And I find that people in our age group are not only taking on the daily stresses of their own lives in terms of work and things like that and money issues, financial issues, but I think they're also taking on the stress of their own children, right? in terms of, whether they get into the right school, whether they're playing in a, if they're starting in a sport or whatever it may be. And that's the reason why that particular article struck me, which is the reason why I sent it.
That you raise a very interesting point there. Talk to us about that, about your life-work balance as a parent, your responsibilities with your job, and then your responsibilities as it relates to being a dad. Specifically, if you can remember back to when you were a first-time dad, is that something you feel like you struggled with? And then is it different today as our kids grow up?
Well, as a first-time dad, we didn't know what we didn't know. And I think things are a little bit different. I think there's more conversation about your responsibility as a parent and your responsibility as a dad. But I think there weren't resources when we were young dads, right? If there were, they weren't readily available. And I can tell you that when we first had our first child, we were both working. And there was probably a part of me, like as you're asking the question to me as a dad, how did I feel about work-life balance? I feel like in life, balance is the key. But because we were both working, I felt that we had equal responsibility with parenting. And I think the moment that Carrie decided that she wasn't going to work and parent, I probably felt, and I may have even externalized this at some point, that the balance shifted a little bit, right? Maybe she had a little bit more responsibility. I'd like to believe it was more about just the work of being the parent, not the decision-making, right? I still feel like there always needed to be balance in decision-making and communicating with our kids. But I felt like the balance shifted a little bit. I can tell you now, I don't feel the same way. I feel like as a dad, even if you are working and your wife isn't or vice versa, the responsibilities are 50-50. And what that means is you just have to be comfortable being uncomfortable because it's hard. It's hard to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week and still be a great parent. But it's the goal, right? It's the goal.
Absolutely.
So I'd say our communication is much better now, but I do not believe that when we made that decision for me to stop working, I don't think that we had a lot of conversation around, yes, the decision to stop working, but not the decision about what now happens with all of the daily tasks around parenting.
For most parents, that's not really a conversation that you start out with. Like, who's going to be responsible for getting the breakfast ready? Who's going to be responsible for washing the clothes? I don't think you start out as a new parent having those conversations. Right. You just kind of fall into a routine, which could at times lead maybe one parent to become more resentful about it. So I think the communication there, like with so many other things, is so imperative that you speak about who's going to do what and how that's going to.
It was a strange dynamic for me because both of my parents worked. Now, this is at a time when mom stayed home, right, and raised the children. But my mother was a working mom at a time that was not very common. So when the decision was made that Jess was going to not work in the workforce, it was a bit of a strange thing for me to get used to. Plus, I had older siblings, and they worked, whether they were a mom, or not. So it took a little bit of time for me to get used to. And in terms of the balance, I always felt I was very fortunate. My father was in education. He was a teacher and then a deputy superintendent, but he originally had wanted to do either something in medicine or finance. But the reason he made the decision to go into education is he had always said that he wanted to spend as much time as he could with his children, even if he wasn't, and he was willing to sacrifice more financial freedom in order to have more time. So I had a very good role model as it relates to that. So I made it just the same way in my business where I would make an appointment for a meeting or whatever it is the same way that I would schedule something that we had to do with our children, whether that was a doctor's appointment, a sporting event, a dance recital, whatever it is. And that's kind of how I found my balance.
Do you think it's shifted at all as our children have grown?
I think that in terms of, they always say the bigger the children, the bigger the problems. So, a lot of the challenges that are coming forth now in their stage of life, I don't think I'm as equipped to handle as you are. You know what I mean? So I kind of allow Jessica to be the lead on that, and I think the kids feel more comfortable with that. And I kind of, provide, some support from the galley, in terms of.
Wait, you thought that you were more equipped to handle potty training and elementary education over.
I did. Here's the truth. I was the one who gave our daughter, who's our oldest, the first bath, because I had nieces and nephews. I have 3 older siblings, so I already had plenty of nieces and nephews. So I had that experience. Jess didn't have that experience. So I was very comfortable with wrapping them up in a tamale in a blanket.
Wow.
I handled that very well, and they don't really talk back at that time. So there's not really much to interact with in terms of problems or issues. Whereas now, as they're older, there's a lot more of that. And Jess is a lot better at that than I am. So she's kind of the lead, I would say, now on.
I think you sell yourself. You're short.
You took words out of my mouth, Ken.
Yeah. I don't know if that's always the case. I will say,
and he does. And there are things that, there are definitely times when the kids need his advice for sure, and different than I would give. I think it's nice to see for them at this stage in their life 2 different perspectives and points of view. I will just say, though, for Lonnie taking care, he's 100% right. When we had our first baby, when Avery was born, I felt like Lonnie just wanted me to have kids. Like that was no. What I mean by that is he was so excited to be a dad that I think I was almost left behind in the hospital. He put her in the car seat. He put her in her going home outfit. He buckled her up, and it was like I had to run.
Yeah, he drove off and had to put it in reverse. That's really funny. I did want to say, I want to just pick up on something Lonnie said earlier, which I think is interesting, and probably dads may process this. Lonnie said he was influenced significantly by his dad. And my situation was different, right? My parents got divorced. I didn't see my dad that often. And then he passed when I was 18. So I don't necessarily feel like I learned a lot of lessons about how to be a dad from my dad, right? And so it's interesting how I just felt like I had to kind of figure it out on my own. And I will say that as we talk about how to, what should a young dad do today, I absolutely believe that young dads should be listening to this podcast, right? I think the listeners today to this podcast are probably leaning toward the female, but I do think that dads need to go out of their way to invest in learning about parenting skills, right? I didn't do that, right? I remember we had one series of trainings that we went through. We did a parenting class, but I really didn't immerse myself. And there's lots of ways to immerse yourself today in learning how to be a parent. And I think that young dads should do that, right?
You mean you didn't read the What to Expect in the First Year?
Definitely did not.
There was a dad version of that, right?
No, it's Ken, you're 100% right. I mean, when you think about it, when you learn how to drive a car, you go to school, right? Or you send your kid to car lessons or driving lessons or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Or if you're trying to learn a new sport, you go see a coach and you do that. There's really, other than a Le Mans class, I don't know if they do those anymore, but other than that, there's people, I think, automatically assume that they know what they're going to know how to handle a child, when it's a lot of trial and error, So I 100% agree with you that you're probably right that mostly women listen to this podcast, but it certainly would benefit young men.
If you were giving either young dads now or even your young dad self, what would be a piece of advice you would give them? Yourself as a younger dad or new dads? Ken, is that what you would say about just taking the time to read the research and figure out, or? I
think that's one of a few things. I could probably come up with a laundry list if I had time, but I would say invest in learning what it means to be a dad. And through examples and role plays, I've learned a lot just listening to your podcast. I mean, you guys keep harping on the importance of communicating. right? And communicating and being authentic and vulnerable, right? If there's something as a dad that you don't understand or that you need guidance, you should seek it out. And you should say, don't feel pride as if all your decisions are going to be the right ones. So yeah, I would say communicating and learning to communicate. And also, like I said earlier, just you're going to be uncomfortable and you just got to be good at sitting in being discomforted by the kinds of scenarios that you're going to have to face as a parent. It's not okay to just say, she's got this, right? Don't worry about it. I know she'll figure this out. You need to be part of the process.
So what responsibility, though, do you think falls on the other parent? So let's just say in our case, right, the mom. What responsibility should be on the mom, on me, when the weight is not being pulled or when it feels like you've assumed that I'm going to handle it, I'm going to take it off, right? What's my responsibility in that? And I'm saying it for, a lesson of the audience. Like, what can moms do to communicate their needs to their partner when it comes to raising kids? What could I have said? What could others say?
Every couple's relationship is different, right? So navigating that responsibility is not easy to just prescribe, but I would say that men tend to react more effectively to specific examples. Like, when that happened, this is what I did, and this is what you did, and this is the issue I had with what happened, and let's just talk about it, right? And so
it wouldn't be enough for me to say, I'm drowning here, this is too much for me to handle.
I don't think that would get the same result as if somebody took the time to be specific. Like, I'm drowning because I have to do this, I have to do that, and you are doing this and that. But the minute you turn it into an offense versus defense, I think,
Right. So maybe asking specifically on where I need help. Like, I need you to pick the kids up because I'm working with dinner or, the schedule of getting them where they are going to be later. So can you get them from school or can you do that? Like a specific task I need help with.
Yeah. Or, and also having maybe more, not formal, but formal conversation about, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about tomorrow. Let's talk about what is going to happen tomorrow. Like, give some advance notice. Like, if you wake up in the morning and go, hey, I need you to do this, this, and this. A dad who is working will tend to say, well, wait a minute, I already have meetings set up. How's that? Right. And one
I have a question actually as a follow-up to what you guys just said, because Jess and I have had this conversation. And so we've always shown a united front in front of the kids, right? And we've always talked about the stuff outside in a different room or whatever it was. On the one hand, our children really have never seen us argue or fight, okay? And on the one hand, that's maybe sounds good, but we've come to realize that that might have been detrimental to their growth in terms of how to deal with conflict resolution. And so I feel as though while we have done a pretty good job, I think, of parenting overall, there are some things that we failed at. And I think that is an area where I do believe that we failed at. So when you were just talking about communicating together, did you do that as parents in front of your children, or did you do that outside where they didn't see, or whatever it was?
Sometimes we definitely talked about things in front of the kids that we probably shouldn't have. And once they got older, like middle school, high school, like I have memories of them like, Ma, like dad, like them trying to referee. Not that we would ever scream at each other because neither one of us are like loud people. But if we were disagreeing and we were going back, like the kids would step in or say something like, do you guys really think you need to be talking about that right now? Definitely as they're young adults, I've heard our kids say that too, like, especially in the car. There tends to be like conversation in the car, which would sound like an argument or we were disagreeing, and they'll step in and be like, really, you guys have to be having this conversation now? Like, why don't you save this for later?
And putting us aside, right? I think your question is more generally speaking, right? You guys made the conscious decision to avoid conflict in front of them. To Jessica's point earlier, I don't know how many parents actually went to the trouble to say, we have to be really careful about having conflict in front of them, the impact it might have on them. And more than likely, the majority of couples fight regularly in front of their parents. It's why there's a lot of crises in this country, right? Divorce and all of those other things, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if we made a conscious decision per se to. I don't know. We just. I think it's part of, you're a product of your environment, right? And so my father was a very calm, still is. He doesn't argue, he doesn't yell, he doesn't scream. He's not like that at all. When he was with my mother over his current wife, and I guess that's what I know. So
sounds like a great guy.
Well, the other part of that is what do couples argue about? They argue about money. They argue about extended family issues. And while we didn't discuss money issues in front of our kids, we did actually have specific conversations without our kids present to not talk about issues that we may or may not have been having with extended family members, because we didn't think it was right to put our opinions onto our kids. Now, when they got old enough and they formed their own opinions and they made observations about whatever it may have been, we were open and honest with them and we answered them in an open way, but they came to whatever conclusions they came to on their own.
Yeah.
So
I think there's, a lot of parenting that goes on that it just happens. Yeah. Like, because you're so busy and you're just doing what you can do to get through that day. And so when a frustration happens right, unfortunately, we don't stop to think, like, is this the right time to talk about it? Who is our audience? We just let loose.
So is there a phrase that's out there called mindful parenting? Because that's what we're talking about. You got to be mindful as a parent.
It's just being mindful in general, just who your audience is, who you're talking in front of.
If I can answer the other question.
Yeah,
so
sure.
In terms of the advice I would give to young adults, I have a few pieces of advice that I think work well for us. One, whenever you can, you got to try to have dinner as a family, whatever age, with no phones. When the kids got a little older and they all had their own, one had a practice and the other one had a dance, all this other stuff. So it was harder to get everybody together, but I think that was very important. The other thing is that drive your kids around, have to be picked up from somewhere and driven with other kids. You learn so much about their relationship with friends. You find out everything just by listening, and all you're doing is driving. So that's the second. Whether you're a mom or your dad, I would absolutely coach or do the dance recital or theater, whatever it is, even if you have no skill set with it, just to spend that time with your child. I wouldn't trade that for anything. And then the other thing is that going back to the original discussion about, parents being stressed out and everything like that, because I think they take on their own problems. I think especially men, we try to solve, right? Like we try to fix it, whatever the situation is. And a lot of times, they kind of have to go through the problem on their own. It's a learning thing. And I think we probably, when they were younger, we probably solved a lot of their issues, right, for them. And I think we've done a much better job as they've gotten older, recognizing that the things that they're going through were, by solving their problem, and when I say solve, I mean different than supporting, right? Supporting, of course, you want to do, but I think we've done a better job as parents, I think, as they've gotten older, of allowing them to fail, right? And figuring it out for themselves while providing support without solving the issue.
It sounds like you listened to Jessica and Carrie's recent allowing your kids to feel disappointment. Good for you.
What? I remember that episode.
Shameless plug.
It's so funny that you are stating like that you innately are a fixer, and we had this conversation a couple nights ago with sets of friends, and one of the other dads said the same thing. But I'll admit that I always viewed the moms as the fixers and not dads. But I've been hearing a lot more of the dads feeling like they are innately the fixers.
I felt like when we were parenting, when the kids were younger, I think now we know that we can't be the fixers, but we had an agree to disagree moment, like you were the fixer. And I would say, maybe you viewed it as me just being a lazy parent, but I was more like, they just have to figure this out on their own, right?
Yes.
I know that that was me. That's what I used to say. Because I felt like if I did it for them, they'd never figure out how to do it. It's just, that was dumb luck that I figured it out. Maybe I read it somewhere. Like, I don't know.
No, I think it goes back to the fact that you did not live with your dad.
Right. Yeah.
And then he passed away at an early age. So you did not have, like, you had to figure things out.
I did. You're right.
So that's what you thought that was your upbringing. So naturally,
that was your experience.
Yeah, that's your experience.
No, you're right.
So,
no, it was the right way to go about things.
Yeah. It's funny. And again, we've talked about this just before when we, were a product of our environment. So, my mother passed away at a young age. I was 21. And I remember I had gone away with my daughter when she was probably maybe 12 or 13. And we landed and she was very upset because she saw on social media, we were away for the weekend, and she saw on social media that there was our friends got together, didn't ask her. So I'm like, but you weren't here. Like, you couldn't have gone anyway. What's the difference? And she's, you don't understand that. I'm like, no, I don't understand. You weren't here. Why would they invite you? You couldn't. I was trying to, I guess, make her feel better, right? Like, in terms of explaining rationally why it didn't make any sense that they would invite her if she was away, right? To me, that was logical. And she's like, you don't understand, Dad. I'm going to call Mom. So I'm like, all right, call Mom. She's going to say the same thing I just said. And so we called Jess. She calls Jess, explains to Jess. Jess obviously says something else in comforting words. And then when I speak to Jess, she's like, you don't understand. I'm like, no, I don't understand. I don't understand. Like, what? We weren't here. She wasn't here. She couldn't have gone. So,
but our kids say all the time, at whatever age they are, you don't understand. And to be honest, we don't understand. You don't know what it's like. We know what it was like for us to be a kid, but it's very different. And I feel like if we could start when they say that, we should just say, you're right. Like that, then they have no comeback. Right. You can't keep going with whatever, the point that they're trying to make. Like, you're right.
Right. Yeah, that was a miss on my part.
We've all had so many misses, and we will still have so many misses. Like, we're just trying our best. We're just trying our best.
We are all trying our best.
Yeah.
If you had to choose, what would you want your legacy to be from your kids? Like, what would you want to be remembered as? So it's interesting because my dad also died before Lonnie and I met and before we got married. And at our wedding, what we had the rabbi do was read a letter that I wrote to my dad, introducing Lonnie to my dad, and Lonnie did the same for his mom. And one of the things that always stuck out to me, what Lonnie said, was that he would want our children to talk about him the way my dad's children spoke about him, right? Mm-hmm. So what would you want your kids to say? How would you want them to remember you as a dad?
And we're not saying that like you're going to be gone soon.
No.
Oh, you know how I feel.
Correct. No, you don't know tomorrow brings. No, fun. As a dad in present time, right?
Yeah.
What would you, when they're off with their friends or with their other people, or they're meeting their significant other, what would you want them to say? My dad is.
My dad is someone who really loved me, right? Really showed that he loved me, told me that he loved me. He modeled, this whole concept of being a good human being. I like to believe that that's super important to me, and hope my kids know someday, if not already, that that's what I want them to know their dad was. Just a good human, right? Someone who cares, someone who's got empathy, got some compassion, willing to do things for others, got a big heart, cool, maybe. But who knows? Somebody fun, right? Someone who really, cared about their well-being.
I would probably want them to say that I was there. I think that when you hear about all these school shootings and this and that, and, I always, especially since they're young, they're typically 18 to 24 years old, right? So when you look back on their family dynamics, I'm sure that their parents were not really very involved in their either upbringing or whatever it is. So I think being there and being present is incredibly important. So that would probably be the first thing I'd want them to say. I would want them also to say that, I was incredibly loyal to them, that they know that I would cut off my hand for them to be in a day of pain. I mean, that would, because that's true. You want to protect your children no matter what. And I hope that they know that, or hope they believe that's what would happen. So those are the things that I think I would want them to say about me if we met an untimely death according to Carrie.
I said, you're not going to have. We're not going to, you're going to be here. It's just, present day.
Oh, and that I taught them the other three things I would want them to know. Is that I taught them to love Billy Joel.
Okay.
The love of skiing and snowboarding, and to be foodies, because we like good food.
That has come back to bite us in the ass.
Yes, now, right. Now it becomes more expensive, but yes. So those are,
yeah.
All those things come back to bite us.
Yeah, that's true. They're all very expensive hobbies.
Yeah.
I was going to say that tomahawk steak is expensive.
Exactly.
I want to thank you guys for being here. I think I really enjoyed this conversation. Carrie, any last?
You know what? I think that you guys are super honest. I'm glad that you're able to share like how, you truly feel about being a dad and supporting what Jessica and I are doing on our podcast and our families. And so this was great. I hope we could do it again and maybe come up with like a funny topic to show, other sides of parenting and that it's not always so hard and serious. But, I appreciate you guys taking the time.
I know I speak for Lonnie in saying that we are incredibly proud of you for doing this. It's giving you purpose in a meaningful and thoughtful, intentional kind of way, and you're doing really good. Needed. So kudos.
Thanks for having us on. It was great. You guys are doing a great job.
All right.
Thank you always for your support. Keep those texts and articles coming so we have more stuff to talk about. All right. And for our listeners, if you have anything you'd like to add or any questions for Ken or Lonnie, you can always drop us a comment or a question at info@parentcoachesunleashed.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Parent Coaches Unleashed with Carrie and Jessica. Together, we can raise the next generation of independent, capable, and compassionate young adults.
We encourage you to send us an email with questions and feedback to info@parentcoachesunleashed.com. Please remember, you are not alone on this parenting journey.